So I'd like to welcome everybody out here this afternoon. We're going to talk about how to release to CPAN. Before we get started, introduce myself. I'm Dave Oswald, and I work for Endurance International Group and Bluehost out of Orem, Utah. I'd like to thank Endurance and Bluehost for letting me be here and letting the other guys that are helping run audio and video at this conference, Jace and back, for taking a week out of our schedules at work and disrupting the sprint and all that sort of thing so that we can come here and participate in YAPC. It's a lot of fun and I enjoy it. So I want to thank Endurance for making that possible. And I mentioned this in my previous talk. I want to thank the Perl community, Perl in general, the Perl people, the Perl language, the people that have worked on it. Perl has made this conference possible, and for many of us has made our careers possible. And so thanks. And if you're kind of new to Perl, which you may or may not be, if you are kind of new to Perl, then welcome, because we love new people also. Although I kind of doubt, I think most of us have been around. So, and I'd like to thank my family also, because they're doing without me for a week as well. But they're getting a vacation out of this too. They're going to fly down to Fort Lauderdale in a couple of days, and I'll meet them there. Okay, so releasing to CPAN is what we're here to talk about. Has anybody in this room already released a module to CPAN? Okay, get out. No, just kidding. Now, hopefully there's still some content in here that's of use to you. I kind of wanted to... Oh, he's holding up the sign that I'm done. I'm done now. Okay. It's okay to have some fun in this talk, by the way. So it makes it a little easier to participate in something that's a little tricky sometimes. Okay, so let's talk first about kind of a pre-release checklist before we even really get started on a module. And the first thing we should kind of be asking is it generally useful? Sometimes many things on CPAN are very generally useful, and it's also good to have things that are specific to certain use cases. But if the use case amounts to a single individual, then it's probably not a great candidate for CPAN, right? We don't want to discourage anybody from contributing to CPAN, but try to keep your solutions general enough that they can be useful to somebody other than just one person, right? We should be asking ourselves, is what we have here better or unique in some way? Does it offer something that is not currently being offered, even if does it offer it in a better way, right? And I didn't put this in, but and I probably should have. I should be able to type on my slides as we're going, but I can't. Have we already tried to reach out to perhaps existing solutions to talk about a bug fix or an improvement that we have an idea for that might make it unnecessary for us to release a completely separate module that nobody knows about, when we could be helping to improve something that's already out there? So, this is a big one. Are you willing to devote the time to producing a quality distribution? Because producing a CPAN quality distribution, although there's a lot of cruft, right? But producing a distribution that we would like to see on CPAN takes some time. And not only time to produce it, but also, are you committed to maintaining it? Because it turns out that things that were written on CPAN 10, 15 years ago are still there today. And that's great, that's wonderful. But sometimes they can fall into a state of disrepair over time. And so it takes some maintenance. And there's kind of the old adage of now you have two problems. You release a module to CPAN and it becomes popular. Well, now you have the problem of you've got a popular module on CPAN that suddenly takes a lot of work to maintain and to support. But I don't want to discourage anybody from making modules. So, as is often the case with Perl, there are many ways to do it. And we'll count a few ways. Xutils make maker is kind of the de facto standard for on which we base many of our CPAN distributions. Module build was kind of the new kid on the block for a while and had its heyday and seems to be kind of fading a little bit. Module install is a kind of a really nice wrapper around Xutils make maker. Zilla, I think it was Sawyer, somebody talked about it during the keynotes earlier today. Zilla is wonderful if you want to manage a CPAN distribution easily, but it also requires half of CPAN. So, no big deal. It's great. And dist Zilla requires the other half in addition. Zilla dist requires the other half in addition to what dist Zilla requires. And I say that with great fondness for all of these tools, but sometimes we're trying to keep the barrier for entry simple for the purposes of this introduction, and so we'll kind of ignore the hard ways. Let's look at one good way to start, because as Larry has said before, although the Perl slogan is that there is more than one way to do it, I hesitate to make 10 ways to do something. And so let's hesitate to talk about 10 ways. We'll talk about one way. We'll talk about the xdetails make maker way. But first, you need a pause account. Who has a pause account? I trust that all the people, yeah, okay, so a lot of us in here do. You need a pause account. It takes about 2 minutes to fill out the form and about 2 months, 1 to 3 days, 1 to 3 days for the account to be open, because it does require some manual interaction, some manual intervention at the other end of the line. And make sure to search CPAN, ensuring you're not requesting a pause ID that's already in use, because that'll slow the process down further. And so here's the obligatory screen capture, because really, how do you get a pause account? So that's how you get a pause account. You go to pause.perl.org and you sign up for a pause account. What does a pause account represent? Well, it represents your CPAN identity and the identity under which your CPAN modules live on CPAN, or the author identity under which they live. So now we're going to do things really the slow way. Let's create a directory framework for our module. We're going to make our module is going to be foo today, because I'm not very creative. Module, we're going to make dir foo, we're going to make dir foo lib, t, examples, and then we're going to change directory into foo. So what goes in lib? Anybody know? Your module, yeah, goes in there, right? Your module code. And in T? Tests, thank you for knowing. Yes, everybody knows that, should know that. Your tests go in T. I'm giving a talk on Wednesday about testing, and there might be other talks at the conference. I encourage you to take in as many of the testing talks as there are possible. Something that I've been seeing more in recent years, and I think it's a wonderful idea, is an examples folder in which you put small little scripts that actually demonstrate use cases for your module, or demonstrate simple usages of your module. I think that's a wonderful idea. I've been trying to put it in some of the modules that I do. It really documentation is great, but it's also great to have some real actual, this works, and you can run it and see what it's doing. So. Okay, now we're going to add some files. So we talked about it already. We're going to add our module, foo.pm. We're going to add a test script called 00-load. We're going to create an example file, an example script, and then makefile.pl, manifest, changes, and readme. So what goes in those files? I don't know. Well, first we need to list what is included in the distribution. So which file do we use that for? Or do we do that with? Manifest. Okay. So in the manifest file, you list all of the files that you want to be bundled up in your distribution when you package it up and upload it to CPAN, including the manifest file itself, very meta. And in this example, I'm including meta.json and meta.yaml. The manifest file allows for comments, and comments are delimited by space. So for many reasons, it's not always a great idea to put spaces in your file names, and this is maybe one other reason not to put spaces in your file names, because on the left there, manifest, that's the file that you want listed in your manifest, and on the right, that's actually a comment, just because of the space. Okay, manifest.skip. Before everybody was using version control, manifest skip wasn't all that useful. It allows you to specifically tell the makefile process to ignore certain files. It's now become quite a bit more useful because we would use it to put in that we want it to ignore our Git directories, for example, if it's a Git supported repository. So. And you're going to put generated files in there too if you've got things that are generated. Now usually the defaults are enough unless it's a version control supported module, in which case you would want to enumerate all of the things that you want it to skip, including the ones that you normally get by default. And you can look that up in the documentation for xutils makemaker for what the defaults are in the manifest skip. Next, we need to include a brief explanation about what our module is all about, and so we include a README file, a brief intro to our module. And rather than post a big line of code or a big example here, just copy one from another CPAN distribution that you like and change it to what your distribution represents. There's plenty of examples. The nice thing about CPAN is that we have 12,000 examples already. There's a lot of prior art. Now, some of it is good art and some of it's bad art, but there's a lot of examples out there, and many of them are good. So, any questions so far? If at any point you have any questions, just let me know. So include a summary description, where to find documentation, include a link to your repo if you have a GitHub repo. Don't ever put version numbers. This is my own opinion, okay? But don't ever put version numbers in things like your README file. I took over maintenance a few years back on the module inline C++, and it had version numbers scattered all throughout the distribution. And that was great until you needed to bump the version number, and then you'd always forget one, and then you'd end up releasing two versions because you released the one that was messed up, and then you got to bump again and release the one that's got them all, and you hope that you got them all. So don't put version numbers, try to limit where you put version numbers. I like to just put them in one or two places if possible. So we need to tie our changes to version numbers somehow, and so how do we do that? Well, we create a file called changes. And changes can have a very simple format. You'll see a lot of formats out there on CPAN, but the simplest format is to have a version number, a date that is just a day and a year and a month, and then a hyphenated list of items that are included in this particular version. You can get more specific on the date. You can go right down to the second if you want in your timestamp. But I tend to like to keep it simple, and in some cases I kind of can tell myself I'm not going to release more than once a day anyway, so just put a date down and keep it simple. There's a testing module that I discovered a couple years ago called test changes, and it will actually parse your changes file and make sure that it contains everything it needs to contain. So that's a nice test script to use. And then we need to construct a makefile. What does the makefile do for us? Anybody know? The silence is golden because it's a bit, oh, there you go, ahead.
It's basically the install script?
Yeah, it's basically kind of like a build, test, and install script. It creates several targets, and I'll show you some of them in a minute. It creates several targets. One of them is make, which builds the distribution. One of them is test, which can be used to run the test suite. And then there's usually a couple others. So, but to create the makefile, you don't have to write it by hand. You can write it using makefile.pl. And this is one of the beautiful things about Perl and about programming in general. It's nice when you can have code writing code for you. And so you write makefile.pl, and makefile.pl can pull in all kinds of configuration from the world around you and can create a makefile that can be used to build your distribution for you. So your makefile.pl will contain your typical header, the use strict, use warnings, I like to put the minimum version number of Perl that my distribution supports in my makefile so that my makefile will die if I'm on a version of Perl that is too old for what I'm supporting, and then use xutils makemaker, and then we have this method called write makefile that we're going to call. And that method, we pass it some arguments that we'll look at in a minute, and it writes out the makefile. Why do I put the version number there? I want makefile to die when it's run if we're on a version of Perl that's too old for me. And the reason I want that is because the smoke testers will tell me, I believe, NA as opposed to fail if they die during makefile. And I want to be able to see in my smoke tests, I want to be able to distinguish between an actual failure and something that I can accept. So. Okay, here's an example write makefile call. So we're calling within makefile.pl. You saw here before we have write makefile. We're going to pass into write makefile the name of the distribution, the author, including your email address, where to get the version number from. See, there's a nice trick. I don't have to put the version number in makefile.pl. Where to get an abstract from. So we're telling it to get the version and abstract out of the module itself. So I only have to put the version and the abstract in one place. The minimum Perl version required. So I'm going to put it in there again. That's because the CPAN indexers kind of need to know that as well. Build requires. I'm not allowed to walk because then the camera won't have me on there. I can use the mouse to point. Here we go. Build requires tells the makefile what components are required at build time that may not be standard Perl modules at build time. So we're going to run a test suite. So let's say that the build stages require test more, although test more comes with Perl nowadays. But and then the next line there, prerec.pm, tells the makefile system and also the CPAN indexing what the prerequisites are at runtime for the module. So build requires is build prerequisites, and prerec.p_pm is the runtime prerequisites. Then there's a field that we sometimes pass in called meta merge. That's becoming more common nowadays than it used to be, and I'll go over that in a minute. And then we give a couple other targets, dist and clean. And the dist target tells makefile, which will then tell make, how to bundle up the distribution. And clean tells how to clean all the junk out of the distribution left over from, say, running tests or from the bundling process. Any questions so far? So you can put into meta merge additional information. You can list the public version control repository. There's a lot of fields that you can put into the meta merge, and they're all documented on CPAN in the module called CPAN meta spec. And so I find myself referring to that frequently when I'm first kind of planning out how to build a specific distribution, CPAN meta spec. The fields are helpful but not necessarily mandatory. But increasingly the CPAN installers like CPAN minus will look at the fields that you put into meta merge and kind of give them their due respect as the install and build process goes. So here's a sample meta merge. I'm telling the CPAN installers and the CPAN indexer that the meta spec we're following is version 2, that we have a bug tracker which has a web URL of HTTPS whatever, GitHub. We have a repository that is of type Git and the URL whatever it is. And then we tell what this distribution provides. This distribution is presumably the list binary search distribution, and it's going to provide foo.pm, which doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a bug. And then prereqs. Runtime recommends list binary search XS, and that's a recommendation that will be indexed. Currently, I don't think anything really happens other than, yes, that's recommended, and you can look that up in the metadata for the module. At some point, someday, we might have tools that actually make use of that field. There are other fields that are also documented in the CPAN metaspec. So now, we need to demonstrate that it works on target systems. So we write a bunch of tests. Here's an example of a test. We use strict, use warnings, use test more, and then use OK foo. We're just seeing if the module can load without compilation error, for example. Can OK foo bar. Can the foo module run the bar method or the bar subroutine? The function exists. Can OK main bar is asking, does this distribution export into the calling package the method bar? And then we're done testing. So this is a very, very simple test script that just kind of tests the basic loading of the module. By default, the test suite that we produce is run at install time on every system that installs our module. It's also run by all of the CPAN smokers. Anybody know what we all know what the CPAN smokers are? Every CPAN distribution is run by the CPAN smokers, which are a bunch of volunteers that have systems set up of various flavors and various operating systems and various Perl versions and even various compilations of Perl. They run our distribution on all of those different systems, and then at cpantesters.org, let's look at it. Let me get a browser over here. At cpantesters.org, you can review all of the distributions, or whatever distribution you want to review, and look at the test results. I can't type sideways and backwards. CPAN TESTRS, there we go. Okay, so let's find something under the L category. Oh, I don't want to look at authors. Here we go. Okay, and let's look at one that I put up a few years ago. List binary search. Takes a minute to load because there's a lot of information. And now we can look here, and we can see that list binary search, let me bump this up in size. Maybe. Oh, it's just slow. There we go. Is that almost legible? Okay, list binary search has passed on Perl 524, Perl 523, and if I drag the slider down, it'll go all the way down to Perl 5 something, and it tells me what operating systems it has passed on and what version of my module. So version 0.25 has passed on GNU Linux, Perl version 524, 523, 522, and so on. I can see that it has not passed on, what is that? KFreeBDSD, which I assume means that there probably has not been anybody to test it. Dragonfly it hasn't tested on, or it hasn't passed on, at least in the last few years. NetBSD, I don't see any tests there, and then OpenBSD. Now I can also drop down further, and I can look at individual test runs. Each line here represents a test run, and you can see that we have 1,218 smokers that have tested this module, and 1,217 of them have passed my test suite, and one gives me an NA, not available, which may be a misconfiguration or maybe something that I could fix. Let's look at this one. We'll just click on it. And this was a Debian. This one passed. It ran all my tests. You can see the test suite run, the test run. It shows me what modules this particular smoker had installed on it in the tool chain. and any comments. It shows me how Perl was compiled. So as a CPAN author, this is very useful information because as soon as I see a fail, I can click on that fail. It'll show up in red instead of in green. And I can look and see what became of my test run. And if there's not enough information in my test run, then I need to add something to my tests and upload another version to CPAN and look at that fail again and get hopefully more information that I can use to resolve the issue. So, okay. Tests are run by the smokers. Tests can also be run anytime. I can run the tests as I'm developing. Users who have installed my module can run the tests. The tests demonstrate the code in action. So just like we put an examples file in our distributions, people can also look at the test suite and kind of see how we're manipulating our code and how we're testing and running it to get examples of how to use it. I listened to a talk one time about giving talks, and they said, occasionally stop and take a drink. It gives people a chance to, yeah, okay. All right. Although I really kind of needed a drink too, so. And testing is really part of the CPAN Perl culture, and that's, congratulations to Perl, because I really think that we're among the early adopters of that kind of testing culture. Putting out there that everything on CPAN runs through tests on 1,000 smokers. It's just an amazing feature that we have in Perl, and other communities have adopted it, but congratulations to Perl for being one of the early adopters. Okay, so now we need a module, and we'll just create one here, libfoo, and foo is going to export a method or a function called bar, and bar does the complex task of printing hello world. And so there's our module, and we're going to continue on the next page, starting with the pod down there. What is pod? Yes, plain old documentation. Yes, plain old documentation. So here's an example of some pod. Head 1, name, and then we give it a name and a quick little blurb about what the module is. We give a synopsis. The synopsis shows how to use the module, so there's yet another example. Yet another place to place an example. Description, and then exports, and under exports you would list maybe the functions that get exported and how to use them. So follow your favorite module's example. Find a module that you like, how they do their documentation. There's no right way, there's a lot of wrong ways, there's a lot of good ways. So find a module that you like and kind of pattern your documentation after that sort of module. And also read PerlDoc PerlPod. PerlDoc PerlPod. That one is an explanation of how Perl's plain old documentation works. Tests are part of the iterative process, so how do we run our tests? You run your tests by, as you're developing your code, you can run your tests by typing prove-lv. -l means to use the local lib, whatever the lib is under your current working directory. And v means I want verbose output from my tests. And then, or you can run your make file and then type make and make test. And when you make test, it'll run the tests also, but it will run them in a less verbose mode. Also prove-bv. So when you first type make, your module is built and installed into a temporary directory called blib under your current working directory. And so prove-b tells Perl to look in blib for your module instead of in lib. And why would you do that? Well, maybe the make process actually writes some code that goes into your module or provides some configuration that goes into your lib folder. So prove-bv would run your code based on that computed code, essentially. Okay, so we'll run our tests, and you can see we've got a bunch of tests here, and it skips some tests that we call author tests, and then it runs some tests that we want to run on every box, and all tests are successful, and at the end we get a pass. And users are going to see that too. When they install the module, if they install in a verbose mode, they're going to see the pass or the fail and all of the tests along the way, or all of the test files along the way. Maybe we should provide a simple example script that demonstrates how to use the module. And so here's examples, example.pl. Use strict use warnings, use foo, quote word bar. So go ahead and import, and then run bar, and it prints hello world. Don't set the executable bit on things that you upload to CPAN. It's just kind of bad form, bad habit, I think. Better to force people to type Perl in the file name that they want to run. It's safer. And now we need to bundle up our distribution. This is the really hard part. Not really. So prepare the distribution, Perl makefile.pl, that runs our makefile. Now make, that builds our distribution. Make test, that tests the distribution that we just built. Make dist check, that checks the manifest against the files that we have in our distribution's file hierarchy and verifies that everything is there that's in the manifest. I like to make dist test because that copies everything into a completely separate subfolder and runs everything as though we're installing the module in that separate subfolder. So it just is one more verification step. And then I like to, even though they're generated code, I like to copy the meta JSON and meta YAML files back into my main module. Then you can remove that foo, that rm-rf foo001. When you make dist test, it puts everything into the module hyphen the version number folder and runs the distribution from that folder. Now we're going to remove that folder to clean up the cruft after ourselves, and then make dist. And that final step just zips it all up into a tarball. And now we have a tarball. Ta-da, foo001 tar.gz. And we're done. We've made a distribution, and it's ready to go. So what was that pause account for again? Well, our distribution needs a home where people can find it. And everybody can put code on GitHub, but it's a little hard to find things on GitHub, right? Well, Perl people know that they're supposed to look to CPAN when they want to find modules to download. And there's a lot of reason for that. GitHub is wonderful, but it's very hard to get a sense looking at a GitHub distribution as to what kind of testing it's gone through and that sort of thing. Whereas with CPAN distributions, you can see what sorts of testing has happened. Let's look at a CPAN distribution. Let's go here to list binary search. So search.cpan.org. List binary search. We're going to find that module. We are immediately presented with the plain old documentation that I wrote. But if I click on the distribution name up here, list binary search version 0.25, I can look at the pass and fail ratio of the tests that were run by the smokers. So as you're looking at modules on CPAN, and you can find this on Meta CPAN as well, you'll see the pass-fail ratio for a module. And if you see something has got a ton of fails, then maybe it's not that well maintained, or maybe it's kind of tricky, maybe it's something you still want, or maybe you want to steer clear of it, but at least you're informed. And we can look at the actual reports. There's two reports here. First, I'll show you one that we haven't seen. This one's kind of cool. It shows all of the distributions, all of the operating systems that it's been tested against, and what versions of Perl it's passed against. And if, for example, under Linux on Perl 524, if 50% of the people that tested it got a pass and 50% got a fail, then that green bar up there would be half red and half green. So you can look at that and say, oh, there's a lot of people having trouble on Windows with this one. 80% of the people are having trouble on Windows, or 20%, or maybe only 1%. And you can just get a quick visual by looking at this matrix here. And then also, the other one that you can look at is, we've already seen this, view reports. Oh, I'm sorry, it's so small. I keep forgetting to bump it up. There you go. Okay. So we clicked on View Reports just now. Perhaps I should have scripted the web surfing because it's... All right, we already looked at it once. It was the pass-fail, the set of passes and fails. Oh, here we are. There you go. So we've seen this already, right? And each one of those lines represents one smoker having run all my tests. To me, that's just an amazing thing. There's 12,000 CPAN distributions. Every one of the 12,000 CPAN distributions has been run on anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand smokers. Just think of the amount of processing time that's gone into testing every one of these modules. It's wonderful to me to think of that. So anyway, let's get back to business. So our distribution needs a home where people can find it. That home is going to be Sipans. So log in at pause.perl.org with the credentials that you got when you set up your pause account. You notice that I talked really early on in the discussion about creating a pause account. That's because it takes a couple days. So you've got some time to make your module, and by now maybe you've got your pause account. Upload it. You don't need to copy down that link. Just go to pause.perl.org and click through to upload it. Wait a few hours because the CPAN mirrors take a while to distribute your code all around. And then you'll start to see it on search.cpan.org and also on MetaCPAN. You'll start to see your code, your module showing up there, and you'll start over the next few days to start seeing these pass-fail tests come through on the test results on CPAN smokers. It takes a couple days to start getting a really good feel that your module is passing everywhere, but yeah, visit cpantesters.org to check out your smoke tests. So are we done yet? No, the next thing is to request a namespace. And oddly enough, we request the namespace after we've uploaded the module. That's just kind of convention. I don't really know why, but that's the way it is. You upload your module, then you request the namespace for your module, and almost always the answer, you'll come back that that namespace has been granted to you. If you don't request a namespace, it's also no harm, no foul, because the namespace will automatically be given to you anyway. So it's just a formality. We go through the formality. It makes people happy, and then why not make people happy? We're all friends. Top-level namespaces are discouraged. So a project like Modulicious, it makes a lot of sense for it to be named Modulicious and to have a name that's catchy. But it doesn't make a lot of sense for list binary search to be Binalicious. Nobody's going to be able to find it. Put your modules somewhere where people will find them. Give them a name that is kind of meaningful and easily searchable. And then, like I said, go through and watch the smoke tests. So what else should we keep in mind? Consider our dependencies very carefully, because every dependency that you introduce means one more module that needs to be installed on the remote system. It also makes the assumption that that module can be installed on the user's system. You can easily get yourself into a situation where you have upped the ante on what it takes to install your module, and by so doing, reduce the number of people that can use that module. So consider your dependencies carefully. Do your dependencies constrain you to newer versions of Perl? Let's say I wrote my module in such a way that it would run just fine on Perl 5.6, but then I base it on a dependency that requires Perl 5.20. Well, now I've just required that everybody that wants to use my module has to have Perl 5.20 installed. And though we would like to live in a world where everybody can install 5.24, I work at a place where we can hardly get beyond 5.10. So, and I love where I work, but that's, Jace, you heard that, right? No, just kidding. Anyway, no, it's just a fact of life that we cannot always make the assumption that we can force people to upgrade their Perl. Do they install cleanly everywhere? So do the dependencies that you are using install cleanly everywhere that you want your module to be able to run? It would be a shame to write a module that can run just fine on Windows, except that you've used some other dependency that won't run on Windows, for example. And do they bring in with them half of CPAN? So Moose is a wonderful thing, and it's wonderful that Perl has dist Zilla and that it has Moose and that it has these really rich ecosystems. But if you've got a module that has one method it doesn't make a lot of sense to make that a moosey thing, maybe. Maybe it does. You're the author, right? Do it the way you want, and you're the author, but weigh your options and realize that when you have a moose dependency, you are upping the ante for some people and making it more difficult for that module to be installed. On the other hand, don't rewrite half of CPAN either. If you really gain benefit by bringing some dependencies in, then use those dependencies. It's a lot better than writing your own one-off solution, which, if you're me, it probably has bugs in it. You know, we tend, the more code we write, the more bugs we write. And so if we can include somebody else's distribution that's been well tested, then we're ahead. Support as many Perl versions as is practical. You can look at Perl Delta to see when changes occurred in Perl. You can also run core list to see when certain dependencies may have been introduced into the Perl core. And support as many platforms as practical. How much time do I have? 8 minutes. Okay, good. So ask yourself, can it support Windows? So can the module that I'm writing support Windows? Does it make sense for it to do so? Can it support OS X? Can it support BSD, Dragonfly BSD? Can it support Raspbian? If it can, then don't write it in such a way that it can't. So that doesn't make sense, right? If I can write my module in such a way that can support many operating systems, then don't write my module, then I should not write my module in such a way that constrains it only to be used on Linux. I should be targeting portability. For your own personal code, for your own business code, yeah, you know where your system's going to be installed, and so it's not necessary maybe. But for something going on CPAN, try to be as open as possible as to where your distribution can be installed. Something I want to mention about version numbers. Regular releases get just a simple version number, and you always bump the version number every time you upload to CPAN. If you change one character in the pod, bump the version number. Change 2 characters, in other words. You always bump the version number. Otherwise, you confuse the indexing and confuse the CPAN installers. Minimize error-prone work by keeping as few version numbers as possible. We'll skip this. There are 12,000 examples on CPAN. So look at some of those 12,000 examples and learn from what's already out there. Module tests are important to you as a developer because you can see how your module is performing, but they're also important to the users because they can gain some confidence. If I look at a module and I can see it's got like one test and the test is use module foo, that's the only test, then I'm going to say, I think I'll pass on that one, right? But if it's got a full test suite that's really exercising it, it makes me feel good about it. Modulicious is a good example. That's a distribution where it's not a feature until there's it's not a feature until there's a test supporting the feature, and it's not patches are not accepted without tests, and that's a wonderful way to be. It makes me confident in being able to use that. Author tests, you can use the XT folder to place your author tests and make your author tests only run if an environment variable is set. It doesn't make any sense to run test pod on the user's systems, right? If the pod is okay on your system, it's okay. You don't need to run those tests. If you have tests that require a lot of dependencies but are unlikely to fail anywhere other than in development, then don't make your users run them. Put them in XT and mark them as release testing only. I have a few author tests to consider. I like test pod coverage, test CPAN changes, test manifest. I'll make these slides available on SlideShare. Test quality. Do people still use that one a lot? Test quality, anybody know? I've used it in most of my distributions. I'm not sure if it's still in vogue or not. Test version is a good one for making sure that all of your version numbers are consistent throughout the distribution. And there are many other favorites. And again, ask around, look on CPAN, ask in IRC. Be conservative in your mandatory test dependencies. And finally, we have to include a license file. And I like to be as liberal as possible in the license. Use a license like Artistic. Use the license that makes sense for your distribution, but use a license that's permissive enough that people are going to want to use your module. The next time around, it gets easier. You can use Module Starter to build most of the framework for you and then drop your code in. And eventually you might want to migrate to dist Zilla. People that use dist Zilla a lot love it and swear by it, and I'm sure that they are probably right. It's a great tool. So you might want to know, how else can I help? Well, contributing to existing distributions is one way. You can find a distribution that you use that maybe has a bug and fix it, submit patches, submit bug reports. There's an author on CPAN named AdoptMe. Any module owned by AdoptMe is looking for somebody to take care of it. You can take over modules that have fallen into a state of disrepair where the module author is no longer around. Contact the author, see if he'll let you take over co-maintenance. And then join the pull request challenge. And we have somebody here that's going to tell us a little bit about the pull request challenge, if you don't mind. And I'll go ahead and kind of finish up with that. So, yeah.
Thank you, David. So one excellent way to start getting involved is by participating in the Pull Request Challenge. And although we're having an event Wednesday night at 6:30, this is a monthly thing that Neil Bowers organizes. He started it in 2005. And the reason why I'm so excited about it is because after over 15 years, it finally gave me an in to contributing to the Perl community. So if you're interested in just getting your hands dirty and your feet wet and start contributing, then I would highly recommend you come visit us at 6:30 or 6 o'clock on Wednesday evening. But I also wanted to point out 2:30 Wednesday, Jason back there is giving a talk specifically about getting involved in the Perl community through the PRC. So if you're considering going to the PRC Wednesday night, I highly recommend you go to Jason's talk. Thank you.
Thanks. So thanks. And I totally agree. The pull request challenge is wonderful. It's a great opportunity to contribute back some of your skills and some of your coding abilities, and also to learn your way around other people's distributions and how to build a distribution, how to put it together, and how to submit patches. It's just a good experience. Also, I know later in the week, Jace is going to speak about the pull request challenge. So try to attend his talk. What day is that? Oh, Wednesday at 2:30. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And finally, I'll just leave this slide up with some reference materials, and that's all that I have. Any questions? Yes.
The license file, that would be in the manifest and in the main directory with.
Yeah, it would be in the main directory for the distribution. You'd put it in the manifest, and then in your license file, you would copy in the license that you're using. And also, you would put it under a license header in the pod for the module as well. You don't have to necessarily spell out the whole license, but you can put this module follows Artistic 2 and put a link to Artistic 2, for example. So, yes.
I'm under the impression that CPAN is for Perl 5 module distribution. How does that interact with Perl 6 module distribution, if there is such a thing?
You know, that's a wonderful question. I hope, does somebody in this room know the answer? So the question is, how does Perl 5 CPAN relate to Perl 6? Is there a Perl 6 CPAN? How does that work? So come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right.
Since I'm not giving a talk this time, I'll interrupt and I'll take the hand to you guys. On Perl 6, it's a little different right now. You can actually upload to CPAN, but there's not really any indexing or anything yet there. So the beginning infrastructure is being started to work on, but it's not really in place yet. What there is there's a project on GitHub called Perl 6. It's github.com/Perl6/ecosystem. And in that is a meta.list, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of it, and you add the link to your meta.info for your particular class, which is similar to the meta file in Perl 5. It's a totally different format, but similar. Anyway, so you do that. But there's not really a CPAN for Perl 6 yet. There's modules.perl6.org is the closest there is, and it just basically, every time somebody updates, somebody's got a GitHub hook that whenever that ecosystem gets updated, it reruns the code for building a list of what's in there. And anyway, it's all really kind of hacked together at this point. But the plan is that there will be basically like a meta CPAN for Perl 6. It's just not there yet.
Okay, fair enough.
I-
Are they going to build that into the existing CPAN or a new one?
I don't know that that's even known. I don't know. I'm not that into the Perl 6 community. I know I have some stuff in the Perl 6 ecosystem, but that's as close as I get.
I can say one thing, and that is that CPAN itself was somebody's wonderful idea and wonderful hack 15 years ago or 18 years ago, and there's nothing preventing somebody from having a wonderful idea and wonderful hack for Perl 6 as well. And they can coexist, but it's all a matter of someone writing it up, right? Somebody
Yeah,
doing
I mean,
it. It's,
Yeah, I think the idea is to jump on the existing CPAN, but
yeah.
it's just nobody's
Somebody's got
finished getting there yet.
Somebody has to implement it.
Yeah, we have to get there.
So you're welcome. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.